Jayanta Mahapatra, former Vice Chancellor, Berhampur University also. Then, sir, welcome to the webinar.
Welcome, sir. Thank you, sir.
So should we start?
Yes.
Very good morning to all of you. I invite all of you to this national webinar on Rousseau and the old age home. First of all, at the outset, I just request our esteemed Vice Chancellor to deliver an inaugural speech. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Moin Mohammed. I will just say hello. Actually, first of all, let me welcome all the distinguished guests, including my colleagues in the university, especially today's speaker, very prolific and academically very active Professor Raghuramaraju and Professor Jayanta Mahapatra, ex-Vice Chancellor of Berhampur University, and Professor Kalidas Misra, and a host of other distinguished guests today. And I think it's all because of the reputation of the speaker, which preceded. I welcome you all to the university, and there are two things just I wanted to put in place. First is it's after long, I think in 2003, when Professor Raghuramaraju visited to speak at a plenary in Forum for Contemporary Theory at Visakhapatnam. That was the time many of us met him, and he was making his reputation as a very good academic. Later, we met at a law conference at Ahmedabad, and all along I have been following his academic output, which is very impressive, and particularly in social sciences. The second thing is the choice of the topic. I was just wondering why Professor Moin Mohammed, what did you discuss with our distinguished speaker to come to that kind of choose that kind of a topic? But I know Professor Raghuramaraju won't choose a topic without a particular or specific region, and I'm sure we are going to listen to that specific region. But those of us from literature background, we are acquainted in a way with Emily the text, particularly with regard to the Romantic philosophy, as well as the post-Enlightenment idea of self. And I'm sure Professor Raju will throw light on that. But I'm particularly reminded about the first sentence of Emily, which is very well known and which speaks a lot about the overall philosophy of Rousseau. Everything is good as it leaves the hands of the author of things. Everything degenerates in the hands of man. I think that's a much quoted first line of Emily, and which in a way sums up the philosophical perspective of Rousseau. And another thing I appreciate Professor Raju's scholarship is his concern with some of the latest developments about the literature of his mother tongue. And I'm very pleasantly surprised to see his work on one very well-known Telugu writer. So here is an academic who combines what he says, the modern frames as well as the Indian themes, similarly Western philosophy as well as the linguistic tradition to which he is heir to. I wouldn't take much time, but I would look forward to his talk, just as many of my colleagues and distinguished guests here look forward to. Thank you, and welcome again, all of you, particularly Professor Raghuramaraju. Thank you very much.
Yeah, revered Vice Chancellor, sir, esteemed speaker of this webinar, Professor Raghuramaraju, dear students and distinguished participants and colleagues. Let me introduce Professor Raju before you. Professor Raghuramaraju has a huge academic profile. Let me just speak it out in a very abridged form. Professor Raghuramaraju passed his MA from the University of Hyderabad in 1980 and received his PhD from IIT Kanpur in the year 1987 and started his teaching career as a lecturer in philosophy in the University of Goa in 1987. Then he joined as a reader in philosophy in the University of Hyderabad 1993 and became a professor in the same university in the year 2001. In 2018, he left the University of Hyderabad to join as a professor in IIT Tirupati, Andhra Pradesh, in the Department of Humanities and Science. As he does, a profound scholar, his research interest is of various extended to various fields in the philosophy, in the subject philosophy. Primarily, he has interest in Indian philosophy, continental philosophy, bioethics, social and political philosophy. During his teaching career, 6 scholars have been awarded PhD degree and 21 students have been awarded MPhil degree under his guidance. One of our colleague, Dr. Ashok Tarai, is his MPhil student who is working in our department. Professor Raju has been a visiting faculty in the Smith College, Southampton University in United States of America, Jadavpur University, Delhi University, Triple IIT Hyderabad, and Manipal University. Professor Raghuramaraju has published 16 books to his credits, that too from very important publications house like Oxford University Press and Routledge, London and New Delhi, and so many other national and international publishers. To name a few, just a deep book entitled Debate in Indian Philosophy, Classical, Colonial and Contemporary, that is published by Oxford University Press. Grounding Morality, Freedom, Knowledge and Plurality of Culture, that is also from Routledge, New Delhi. Modernity in Indian Social Theory, that is from Oxford University Press. Philosophy and India, Ancestors, Outsider and Predecessors, that is also from Oxford University Press. His recent books are The Prince by Machiavelli, Classic in Philosophical Studies, Classical Series, that is also published from the Oxford University Press. Second, Calibrating Western Philosophy in India, Rousseau, Derrida, Deleuze, Gautry and Bedera Chandidas, that is also from Routledge and Routledge, London. So he has also published more than 50 research articles in different national and international journals of a very high standards. He has received 21. He has reviewed 21 books published by different national and international publishers of repute. He has also published 15 articles in the national newspapers. And He has also written 24 articles in vernacular language, particularly in Telugu. He has delivered 95 invited lectures in different national and international universities, including in the Southampton University, USA, Osaka University, Japan, and Tel Aviv University, Israel. He has presented 93 research papers in different seminars and conferences conducted by different national and international universities. He has been assigned to prepare reference materials for e-Pathshala of UGC and for distance education of University of Hyderabad. He has been He has been a reviewer of philosophy books published by Oxford University and Rutgers University. So we are very fortunate to have him as our speaker in this webinar. We could not have had a better person than Professor Raju to speak on this webinar. Today's topic is just Rousseau and the old age home and the institution of old age home. Rousseau, as we know, a student of philosophy and other social sciences, he is a genuine philosopher, and he started his philosophy by assuming state of nature as a normative guide. Unlike Hobbes, Rousseau holds that the state of nature, instead of being a virtueless and chaotic one, is really a place where uncorrupted moral prevails. Any deviation from that state of nature is the worst of, and they would they would be. A good life be ensured when we are free from unnatural limitation and decadence of civilization and a forced lifestyle of modernity. The modernity, with all its negative influence, degenerates man in the state of amour propre from the state of amour propre gestio. The former is artificial and encourages man to compare himself to others, ipso facto creating unwanted fear and allowing man to take pleasure in others' pain and weakness. But the latter is a positive self-love, an instinctive human desire for self-preservation combined with the human power of reason. There are many unforeseen maladies in modern world which encourages people to go for a nucleus family, leaving the unwanted parents in a lurch. Old age home is one of there are so many institutions that have been emerged to counteract this maladies. And old age home is one of such unintended consequence of the modernity in the West. Rousseau seems to have given a foundation to the institution of old age home. The modern Western tradition doesn't seem to have taken into consideration the post-adulthood, non-productive phase of human life. We expect Professor Raghuramaraju, during his course of talk, would reflect on the different issues related to different dimensions of this institution of old age home that have not been foreseen by the West. I don't want to stay between the speaker and the audience. So now I would like to request Professor Raghuramaraju to deliver his talk. Sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Professor Nagaraju, the Vice Chancellor of Gangadhar Meher University, whom I have met. I remember our meeting both at Vizag and later at Nirma University, Ahmedabad. On both occasions, I remember him and thank him for his generous words about me and my work. And I also thank Professor Mohin Mohammed for this kind invitation to speak to you today. Let me just make one or two clarifications at the outset. One is that I wanted to be known basically as a compiler rather than authors of my books. I say this not out of humility, but out of a legacy that I wanted to inherit and I follow. I have made this decision very early in my life that I wanted to follow the legacy of Badarayana, who is the first compiler the world has produced. Without Badarayana, you won't have different systems of Indian Vedanta systems in India. So that is a legacy that I wanted to emulate as much as possible. I'm a poor copy of it, but that's the clarification that I want to make. So most of the books that I have authored, they are not authored books, they are compilations. And any one of you can compile. The reason why I chose this path of compiling books rather than writing them, at least alternatively, is because in India, I find there is a lot of scholarship that is unattended, which is already there. In other words, it is like a cooked material, cooked dishes all around, and it's like a buffet. So when you have a cooked material, it is not advisable to go and cook one more dish and write one more book in addition to that. So I thought that instead of writing more books, I will only compile the material that is already there. So that's the first clarification. Now let me just start. I have this habit of framing my presentation. In other words, framing an idea and not directly go into an idea. By way of framing, I have two frames. The first frame is that there is this criticism on Indologists, which Professor Nagaraju knows when we discussed this thing in the Contemporary Thought Forum for Contemporary Thought. There is this allegation that Orientalists they were interested in India for their Eurocentric purposes. So the Orient, and they have read India, not because they were interested in India per se, but because they wanted to further their political interest in this. So many post-colonial thinkers rejected this as Eurocentric and abandoned it. And this is piloted by Edward Said in his book, Orientalism. I agree with Edward Said, but then I disagree with him about his conclusions. Namely, if Orientalists studied India for their own sake, what stops me, an Indian, using the same formula which is available to me ready-made by the Orientalist, and do the following? Namely, I, from India, will read European texts for India. Now, this doesn't make it a provincial. It only makes me to follow exactly what they have followed, except that I make a distinction between a formula and a specific content of the formula. So I retain the formula, but replace the content. That is, West reads India for their own purpose. I replace West by India, that India reads West for its own purpose. That's where I come from. That's the, my first frame. So now let me just take off from there. So why do I read Rousseau? The reason why I read Rousseau is not because I want to contribute to the Western scholarship of political philosophy. No, I'm not. That's not my interest at all. I read Rousseau because I find him making some gestures, certain advances that has implications to India today. That is, the old age home is a new institution that India is now beginning to see. Okay, now in this institution, we find that it is a new institution. It is not like family, which is dated to almost can be traced back to human existence. So it is not, old age home is not like family as institution. Old age home is also not like university as institution, because university as institution is a modern institution designed specifically for the purpose of inculcating, transmitting, teaching the liberal modern ideas to students and make them knowledgeable about modern things. Even when they teach the pre-modern things, the format is modern. So that's the reason why this institution is not like university. Old age home is not like a university, which is a modern institution, nor is it like a family, which is a traditional institutions. So how do I look at this institution? There are two ways of looking at this institution. One is to understand this institution as designed by some agency, some group of people, or a country, or a group of people who said, now, like we have designed a university as institution or some other thing as institution, let us design a old age home as an institution. Did it happen like that? In fact, it did not happen like that. Nobody, you find, has designed the old age home. It is not by design. So how is it, if it is not by design, how did it come to us? It came to us as a consequence. So it is not intended to be an institution for a particular purpose, or it is not intended to be an institution to serve a particular positive purpose. In contrast, it is an institution that came to take care of some unintended consequences of modernity. So, old age institution is different from university as institution and family as institution. Old age home is something analogous to something that we find in urban societies. In urban societies, we find an institution called slums, or the area called slum. So every modern city that is built, that's built, has a slum. This is wonderfully pointed out by Professor Ashish Nandi. Okay, he makes a distinction between cities with slums and cities without slums. Now, how does slum come? The slum did not come as a design. Okay, people did not want to build a slum. What they wanted to do was, they wanted to build a city. And people, workers particularly, who have come to build the city, have stayed back, some of them at least, and that has become a slum. Now you understand now that city is intended to be an institution, but slum is a consequences of that building of a city. So now most of the cities have slums, and slums are not by design, but as a consequences of certain other ideas, certain other projects or building of institution like a city, that a slum emerges. Now, without intending any pejorative shades to it, an old age home is similar to that of a slum. Okay, in its structural aspect, not in its emotive aspects. I'm not saying that old age home is a slum. Okay, I'm saying that like a slum, which is a consequence of something else. That is, they wanted to build a city, and as a consequences of building a city, a slum came as a consequence. Similarly, old age home was not designed by somebody. They did something called promoting individualism in modernity. I'll come to that in a moment. And as a consequence of that, and I would go to the extent of claiming, as an unintended consequences of that, a old age home came into existence. So this is my first point. So how do I understand old age home? I don't understand old age home in relation to either family as institution or university as institution. Excuse me. Rather, I understand old age home similar to that of the slum, without making any pejorative claims in this comparison. So now, how did that that happen? I will now discuss how that happened. Now, we all know that one of the major foundational claims of modernity is individualism. One of the major foundation of modernity is individualism. That is, they have instituted human being at the center of the universe for everything. According to modernity, it is individual who is a point of reference. So it is what is called as individual centeredness, or in technical terminology, it's called as anthropocentrism. So they instituted individual at the center and replaced individual replaced the God-centeredness or nature-centeredness of the traditional societies. The God-centeredness and nature-centeredness of traditional theories is rejected by modernity, and they have instituted in its place or installed in its place a new idea called the individual. And now in modernity, despite a lot of differences amongst them, the pillar of modernity remains the individual, which is fine. Now, having instituted individual at the center of the universe, which is called as anthropocentrism, it gave rise to the following consequences. One, we got rid of traditional dogmas. We got rid of the oppression in the theology or monotony in the theology. We also got rid of the traditional authority, which is both burdensome and irrational and based on beliefs. Okay, so and after getting rid of these traditional oppressions and authorities, and then in terms of positive things, the individualism gave rise to a very interesting development of individuals now can act with freedom. They can exercise their liberty, and they can claim their rights. So rights, liberty, freedom, individualism, or rights, liberty, and freedom are the attributes of the individual. They are not, along with an individual. So there is a hierarchy, there is a stratification. Individual is at the center of the cosmos for modernity, which is called as anthropocentrism. And the attributes of these individuals are freedom, rights, liberty, and things like that. So what is the core of modernity is not freedom, liberty, and things like that. They are important, but they are attributes of a larger agency and that's called the individualism. And now you find, this idea of individualism permeates into in literature, and it goes on into in academics, in science, and things like that. And what we have today are the practices of these individual postulates, which has really made us to take a U-turn from the traditional societies. That's a remarkable, really remarkable achievement of modernity. And it is one of the major shifts, maybe only the second or third shift in the history of human being. Nowhere a massive task like this was undertaken, both in terms of depth and also in terms of its extension. And it is spread like wildfire across the globe, though in varying, with varying success. I'll come to it in a moment there. So the individualism has become very important pillar, and not many people were in a position to undermine that. However, you find there are romantics, which Professor Nagaraju has referred to, who try to bring in a different perspective, but then you remember that they are very marginal. The romantics were only read, but not followed. That has not become a part of the mainstream of the social life of modern Western societies. Okay, so notwithstanding these counter traditions, which remained marginal, right or not, it depends upon in which political lineage you are in. But the point that this fact remains that became the center of this new and radical paradigm. Now, with this, let me just now bring into discussion some interesting developments that seems to counter this individualism, or more importantly, to explicate the new forms of authority, new forms of power that individualism is generating. Okay, yes, the individualism has liberated us from the earlier forms, got rid of authority, God, and individual oppression and things like that, inequality. Another important thing is inequality. But there are people who try to point out that despite this liberating and revolutionary stance of of modernity, of modern individualism, there are indeed some interesting shades which we have not recognized earlier that are also becoming oppressive, or were oppressive from the beginning, or it is not that they have become oppressive. They pointed out that they were there from the beginning. It is just that we did not notice them at that time. So it is not that some new developments took place and then we are now trying to point them out. They were there right from the beginning. It is just that we did not recognize. It is a failure of this scholarship. It is a failure of our perception. We have not read what was there in the writings of the modern thinkers, and that is why we interpreted them as absolute revolutionary, virtues, whereas you do find there are certain cracks in them, there are certain limitations in them, or more importantly, there are some defects in them, or the feminist would go to point out there are certain disguised subversions in this formula. The feminists particularly have pointed out how, for instance, the entire human-centeredness is nothing but male-centeredness. Is nothing but male-centeredness. Susan Muller-Okin in a famous essay published in Ethics, says something very, very nice. She comes up with a formula. She says that modernity modern morality is founded on rationality. Modern morality is founded on rationality, in contrast to the traditional morality, which is based on God. Now, having founded modern morality on rationality, you find Immanuel Kant, who is a leading modern philosopher, very leading modern philosopher, in his less known works, from the beginning to the end, maintained where he equated male with reason and woman with emotion. And modern morality that is based on rationality rejects or excludes ruthlessly the emotion. So now you have one formula, but the next point of the formula, next stage of the formula is that having based morality on rationality, they have equated women, male with rationality and women with non-rationality like emotion. That's why they pointed out that this is the design of all these people. It is not done by one single person. It is done by a very, very important and powerful thinker like Immanuel Kant, particularly in his essays on anthropology from that famous essay, and things like that, beauty and sublime and things like that. So this is pointed out, and they really come to slice modern individualism into two pieces, saying that that if modernity thinks that it is universal and it takes care of all of us, it is not so. It is not so. Okay, half of us, that is women, are not there. We are not there in their thing because they have excluded us right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. That's the kind of a thing that you get. And then you have people like Foucault, who have come up with a very interesting point where he said that the modernity, feminists have pointed out the modern individualism as a male individualism, Foucault went to show how the individualism that they talked about is meant for production. So that's why when in a traditional society, you keep the ill people at home, you keep the people who are not well at home, okay? Whereas in the modern society, we created at least two new institutions. One is the clinic, which is called as Birth of Clinic, and he does fantastic, archival research to demonstrate how clinic is a modern institution, and also the asylum. Okay, so where and the asylum and these things are based on a theoretical knowledge demarcations instituted by modernity. And he makes a very interesting observation. He says that unlike traditional societies, where what they don't like stays outside the purview, what they don't like stays outside the purview. In contrast, in modern societies, what is excluded is housed and quarantined, like quarantined within the society. That is, that you will find prison, clinic, and asylum right in the middle of modern society, but completely quarantined, very carefully quarantined. So that's the point that they make. Just give me 1 minute. So with these two points, I wanted to now add something which even Foucault did not recognize. And what Foucault did not recognize is very, very, astonishing. And he did not read something which is there in the text, which I think is very important. So what neither feminists nor Foucault recognized is that while Foucault established the relationship between a human being as a producer for capitalism, and feminists have identified the male-centeredness of individualism, what they have not recognized, they have not read what is there in the text, is what I wanted to discuss it in the remaining time. And that is that the idea of individual is not only male and not only individual for production, but it is an adult. Okay, so if you look at human being as consisting of three different phases: adulthood, childhood, adulthood, and old age, you find that the texts of modernity, particularly two texts that I will discuss with you now, have very clearly, very, very clearly, it is not their problem, and unambiguously said that individual that they are talking about is not to be equated with either childhood or with old age. It is exclusively to be identified, equated with adulthood. That's the point that I'm trying to say. So the individual that we are talking about is bereft of not only women and also non-rational, but also childhood and old age. It is the slicing of the tree, as it were, of slicing of the roots and the branches, like a carpenter, for the sake of the timber. That is there in the text. It is not. This is what I'm to claim, that it is not that it is there later. It is not that we are superimposing it on that. It is there right in the in the texts of these modern thinkers. It is our fault that we have not read what they wrote and presented it differently. This is what I wanted to present it to you now. This is how I wanted to read this text. Before reading the text, I will tell you what is outside the text. Now, you know that Aristotle is the one who said that the whole is prior to the parts, and but then he also said in politics, there is a statement where he says, however, for theoretical purposes, a polis can be disaggregated into villages. Villages can be disaggregated into communities. Communities can be disaggregated into families, and families can be disaggregated to pairs. And what are the pairs? He lists three types of pair: ruler and ruled, man and woman, child and parents, and slave, master and slave. And then says something which is very, very interesting, and that is, he then asks, can pair be disaggregated into further units? The answer for him is no. The reason why it is no is because man and woman are the basic units for Aristotle. There is no further disaggregation possible. The reason for this is that for one person to come into existence, two people should have come in sexual union. Now you find that, something like this in Plato's Dialogue Symposium. You also find these things in Chandogya Upanishad and also Mandukya Upanishad. Okay, about the birth of the universe and things like that. That I don't want to get into it. But the fact remains that according to Aristotle, for one person to come into existence, two people should have come in sexual union. So that means 2 is prior to 1. So the basic number for in his arithmetic, the basic number for Aristotle is 2, not 1. And as long as 1 is not the basic unit, you can't have individualism, because individualism is closely associated with disaggregated 1, disaggregated, unencumbered 1. So as long as you accept Aristotle, there is no way you can have individualism. So individualism is impossible within the Aristotelian framework, and he made sure that you cannot actually jump over his argument. It is against this background, and this is very clearly seen by Descartes, who comes up with the following thing. He says that you should not, I read this.
Professor Raju, you are not audible. Hello.
So Professor Raju is disconnected for a moment. He's coming back. Sir, you unmute.
Yeah, now I'm audible?
Yeah, sir. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, something went wrong. Yeah. So I said it is virtually impossible that our judgment should be as unclouded and firm as they would have been if we had always been guided by it alone. So that means he is saying that as long as you talk about childhood, which is governed by appetite, you will not be able to institute individualism. So what you need to do is you have to bypass childhood, jump over it, and then start with adulthood, which is not governed by appetites and teachers, but governed by rationality. So now you find that he is the one who completely in the first innings sliced off the individual childhood from the discourse of modernity. Now that's fine, that is done. But then it is not just the first innings. There is a second innings, and in the second innings is started by this person called Rousseau, who in his famous social contract comes up with a very interesting statement, which, the people who read Rousseau have not paid attention to it. I went through that entire industry on Rousseau. I don't think anybody has paid attention to it. And I quote that passage. The most ancient of all societies and the only one that is natural is the family. And even so, the children remain attached to the father only so long as they need him for their preservation. As soon as this need ceases, the natural bond is dissolved, the children released from the obedience they owed to the father, and the father released from the care he owed his children, return equally to independence. If they remain united, they continue so no longer naturally but voluntarily, and the family itself is maintained only by convention. So what is interesting about this passage is he's saying that he's making one important point. He's saying that he's using the word father. Feminists have blasted him, and rightly so. Okay, the children are not only with father; it should be with mother, or they're also with mother. That's one thing. But what feminists have not recognized is there is something here that the father takes care of the children till they become adult. And once they become adult, then they become independent. They're ready to, leave the family. So the problem here is that in the traditional family, if the parents take care of the children, then children in turn take care of the parents. So the calculation, the transaction is closed. But in Rousseau, who is a contract philosopher, the transaction is not closed. You know why? Because the father is spending time and energy, time and resources on the child. Okay? And then child does not take care of the father. There is nowhere you have this obligation in this passage. So now the transaction is not there. Suppose if child takes care of the parents, then he is not available for production. Okay, if all our children, so it's not, I'm not making a complaint about our children or we as children, because how many of us wants our children to stay with us and not work or study? Very few. Many of us we don't want that. So it's not an individual problem. I'm referring to the larger structural thing into which we are all caught. So that the question about children taking care of the parents is ruled out. Sorry, it is ruled out. So, but then how is the transaction closed? The transaction is closed in the following way. That is, the father is taking care of the children because there is no other way an adult is made. Adult has to go through the childhood thing. So you have to really do the investment there. But then the father does not get his returns. But in Rousseau, if you read it carefully, you do have a provision there in the subtext where this is fulfilled. That is, the father is taking care of the children, his children, and children don't owe anything to the father. The reason why they don't owe anything to the father is because father is clearing the debt that he owes to. The father is clearing the debt that he owes to his father. Okay, so in other words, it is like an half circles going around. So I don't invest. I invest on my children, and then I still feel that I am not. My children are not indebted to me because I am only clearing the debt that I owe to my father. I hope this point is clear. In other words, he is the one who has dismantled the circularity and instituted a linearity with half circles. So once this guilt, this is clarified, what is important is what is the topic of our discussion today, and that is that if you take care of your children, And now, since they have to go and work, study or work, they cannot take care of you. Who will take care of you? How do we dispose you of when you need the help of people around you, exactly like the way in which your children needed you when they are born? When your children needed you when they are born, you can't make the demand. And who can take care of it? It is to take care of these old people. An old age home came into existence exactly like the asylum and clinic came into existence. Came into existence. So that's the reason why I wanted to bring this into the thing. So it's a larger, the old age home is a larger, is an institution that came as an unintended consequence of modernity, and particularly its notion of individualism. It is for this reason I hold Rousseau as founder, as laying the foundation for this new social institution called an old age home. So let me just wind up by making some preliminary remarks, and that is that the reason why I read these modern Western political thinkers is to begin to discussion about what is happening in India. As I told you right in the beginning, that I read these texts because I'm interested in India. Okay, and what do I find in India? What do I find in India is that old age homes are beginning to emerge. They are not as many as they are in the modern West. Now, when they begin to emerge, India is at a very crucial crossing where we can now start thinking about these institutions, which was not possible for the West. So please remember that West instituted individualism, and as a consequence came the old age home, exactly like the slum. Whereas in India now, we can start think about these, relook at the notions of individualism that is going on in our society. Luckily or unluckily, even 90% of India still remains, non-modern. Okay, so unlike the West, who have to face this as a consequence, old age home as a consequence, it is possible for us in India to start discussing about both the original ideas of individualism and the consequences such as old age home. So that I'm not saying that we should not have old age home. I'm also not saying that we should have old age home. I'm saying that whether you are this side or that side, let this be an informed kind of an arrangement, and let the old age home in India not be a product of an unintended consequence, but a reflected institution. So that is the reason why I said that I read these modern Western philosophical texts. So this is what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for your illuminating lectures, and I hope it is time for all of us to reflect on the issue, whether we would like to go for the old age home and not. But it is better if we discuss or if we reflect on the issues and try to prevent the emergence of such old age home, if possible. Okay, now I request our colleague, Dr. Ashok Kumar Tarai, to take up certain questions or queries or observation from the different participants. So, Dr. Tarai, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Raju sir. It is both a great privilege and pleasure to listen to you after almost a decade. It reminds me of my student days at University of Hyderabad, that how you go into social contract and the classical political philosophy. And you yourself say that you are a comparer. I strongly object to that view. I think that you study philosophy from a genealogical perspective, and you go line by line, and that is quite prevalent in the classrooms. That I still remember when you were teaching us the social contract of Rousseau, that you suggested us that why there is a column in between man is born free and it is in change. And what is the significance of this whole idea of end? So these two parts were still, mesmerizing in my mind. It is quite refreshing to listen to you after so many years.
Dr. Ashok, ask others to mute themselves.
Yeah, okay, please. Yes. Please mute everyone, and please leave your questions precise and conceptual in the chat box. So we will try to read out your question and try to reach it to Professor Raju. Now I can see there is already a question raised by...
Ask Gautam Satpathy to mute.
Yeah, Gautam bhai, please mute yourself. Gautam bhai, please mute yourself. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So I think there is already a question which is raised by Pramod Kumar Das. He wonders about the Cartesian notion of individualism, that is particularly the Descartes' idea of individualism, which you perhaps did not mention. So if there is any reflection on that, sir.
Yeah, Descartes' notion of individualism is the individualism which is bereft of childhood. Okay, having done that job in the first innings, he left the rest to Rousseau, and Rousseau has chopped off the old age from this individualism. So what you have is the contribution from both a collaboration between both Descartes and Rousseau. It is almost like a relay race. So both of them converge on this thing. Both of them subscribe to individual as an adult.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think he has a different question also, that should there be old age home institutions intended or unintended? I think Professor Raju has made this point very clear, that it is a product of the whole the whole idea of modernism, which is unintended. And that is something very significant, and we don't want that unintended product in India. If it is, it is there, then it has to be intended. So that is what he meant. I think this is something clear. So we have the next question, which is raised by Suman Selli. It's Indian modernity, it's colonial modernity. What is the difference between early modernity and the late modernity? Please throw some light on this, sir.
That's a good question. The early modernity and late modernity, the difference is only in degree. So what I do as a student of philosophy is to look at what is the common denominator on which both of them can be, put together and start discussing. So I find that till today, whatever this kind of thing that we have done, so many people opposing each other and things like that, but the common denominator remains the individual centeredness. This is the problem even with the collectivists. The collectivists are talking about not the pre-modern collectivity. They are talking about collection of individuals.
Right. Yeah, we have the next question, which is raised by Madam Narmada Parida. She says that man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. That is the rhetoric line of Rousseau. But do you also consider this whole idea of old age home is also like to be in chains? Is it part of this whole idea of chains?
The we have to read that those two enigmatic but well-known statements, man is born free, everywhere in chains, very carefully, because they are very deceptive. In fact, they read to me exactly opposite of what they have been meaning to other people. One is man born free? Man can become free. To say that man is born free is to defy ontology. Okay, that's the first statement. Everywhere he is in chains. Which man is Rousseau talking about? Is he talking about the man in the state of in societies? And what are the chains like? Now, about the second question, I do not want to use the this beautiful metaphor of chains. I wanted to say it is exclusive. It is quarantined. Okay, the people in old age home are quarantined. They're enclosed so that they don't come and interfere with the activities of the adults. Exactly like Foucault talks about the fortification of clinic and asylum.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, I should say, please be precise in asking this question. There is a question by Alok Prasad, if I can read. Yes. So he says, I think individualism is the consequence of modernity and not the cause of modernity. Please clarify.
No, individualism is the foundation of modernity. Tell me one modern person. That's why I said right in the beginning that all these things like equality, fraternity, freedom, liberty, rights, they are all the attributes of the individual. They are all attributes of the individual. In fact, Ashok remembers that, if you look at social contract theories, that they may differ about the attributes. One is finds that one is evil, the other one is good and noble and things like that. But what is common to them is that it is an individual. So I make that stratification and hierarchy very clear.
Yes. As of now, there is, I cannot see any question. I think they're all nice words about you, sir. Yes, I mean, since there is, yes, one question has come, yes. By Sumon Asutas, why people in a country like India are conservative in nature and why we have a nature of not accepting anything after facing things several times. I quite don't get this question. Okay, there is another question by Professor Kalidas Mishra. That don't you think that the institution of old age home runs counter to the institution of family in India that talks of love and togetherness and integration?
Yes, but then now let us not be in a complacent position that it will run for some more time, because it runs now concurrently, but that's because there are people of our generation who are exposed to the previous generation sentiments. Okay, but whether you think or confident that with our children and their material, will it continue in the same way? If it does, it is fine. If it doesn't, then we have to discuss it. See what? The only thing that I'm saying is that whether it is this side or that side, let it be an informed kind of a discussion about this institution rather than facing it as a brute fact, as is the case in the West. India has a best opportunity to seize this, rare opportunity and come up with wonderful kind of a thing. I mean, one thing that I've been always thinking was that I wanted to go to America. I generally don't want to go to America. I don't want to leave this country even for one day because it is a very fascinating country. But suppose if I go to America, I want to do a survey where you go to all the old age home and ask those people whether they regret their individual choice as adults. Now, retrospectively, you will get a wonderfully different data. You will get a different data because when you are an adult, you are you want to make choices. But now, when you are old, whether you wanted to have same choices, you stick to your same choice, or you have changed your opinion. And suppose if you have, what are the nature of that opinion? That is something that is going to be very, very fascinating. So now it is not only discussing about old age home in India, but from India, you can raise these questions to think. I mean, in the pandemic, you have seen the number of people who died in Italy are old people. Okay, so, but it doesn't come for discussion because there are these dogmas of modernity and they will not be interested in disclosing those dogmas.
Right. So, yeah, I think I missed out one question and by Dr. K. Om Naran Rao, the idea that I am clearing the depth of my father in taking care of child. And having said this, my child is left free. His duty will start when his children grow up. This has to be explained in greater length.
Yes. To begin with, we have to sit with that, look, what I have teased out is only one small premise. It is necessary for all of us to sit there and discuss about not only the various facets of this algorithm, but also various subtexts and their extensions, and it will run into a very interesting and very, very exciting kind of a discussion. Just sit with this. Okay, this is what happens to me, what happened to me in my relation with my parent. Now this is what happens to me in relation to my children. What will happen to my children in relation to with them? How will they look at it? It is a very fascinating spectacle that is in front of us. And we are not seeing the spectacle that is in front of us.
Yeah, we have a question from Sonna Prabha Biswal. I think I also have something to say with her as well. That when you see the Western idea of modernism, particularly Rousseau, that you say that he was quite influenced by modernism and so on. Then the problem with the Indian idea of old age home institution, don't you think that this is a kind of cultural gap that we are having, and we don't take modernism per se in India, but we have a cultural hegemony, I would say, and we have been following that. So our parents are like, it's beyond imagination to put them in an old age home or to put them somewhere else. So it's not about modernity. It's about rather the cultural hegemony that we have, whereas in case of West, it is not there. So do you agree on that, or you have something to say?
I'm saying I agree with you, but I want to assemble what your statements as put them in a basket, saying that there is a cultural gap. Now I don't want to leave it at that, and I want to really now take that, grab that for philosophical scrutiny. So what is the nature of this cultural gap? And what are the two constituencies, which whom we are comparing in relation to this gap? And where is this cultural hegemony of India? What is its nature? Okay, what is it leading to? And most importantly, what are people in the West happy with in the old age home? Please remember that it is not only that, my parents are old, I also will become old. Okay, now if I become old, which option is better? I know about old age home that I am going to get into, or I suddenly enter into old age home and get depressed.
Right.
That's the most important thing. Now, if you look at the Indian system, I'm not endorsing it. There is a lot of cruelty. There is a lot of cruelty. But there is one thing that is there for optics. For optics, children and adults know about the old age home which is in front of them. They don't have to read, they don't have to see movies to know about old age home, like Piku or whatever that is. Okay, you have it in front of you. So I follow a care ethics. In my reading, it is not that old people need adults.
Right.
In fact, it is the children and adults who need old people, so that they know about their future better now.
It is. I think it is quite explained in that book, which has come, in 2019 very recently, calibrating Western philosophy. And the first chapter you discussed that, and I have gone through that chapter. It's quite refreshing and quite radical in approach. And you are the first of kind who has interpreted Rousseau in a very different way, picking out this idea of old age home, which has not been done by any Western or Indian philosopher, as I know. So moving on, we should go back to another question, which is raised by Professor Sabita Tripathi. She is asking this question: that what is structural individualism? What is
Individualism. Structural
individualism? Okay. What is structural individualism? Okay.
I don't think I can answer the question. I have not worked in that area.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So there is another. Please keep your questions besides all these nice words. So they are okay, but the questions should be separated from those nice words. Okay. There is another question by Lopamutra Chaudhary. Is there any similarity between Vanaprastha and old age home?
Yeah, there is a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
There is a lot of similarity.
Yeah.
Because the Vanaprastha is a different thing. So again, now to be, even if I have to bore you, I'm saying that let us bring this dimension. When you think about a discussion about old age home in the West, which can reflect about Vanaprastha? No. Okay, that's what I'm saying. That is our fertile ground. That is our fertile ground to really grab this opportunity, bring all these dimensions into the discussion, and not, a new way of thinking, which will be not only useful for Indian society, but also can be a good example to look at for the other society. That's it's very important.
Yeah. We have another question by Ragesh. I think he is pointing out this proposed idea of a clinic. That can we really talk that the clinic and asylum came to exist intended? There is intentionality involved in it. I think he's saying, I think these institutions came to exist as an unintended consequences triggered in the power structure of modernity. In that sense, can we talk old age home as one of the disciplinary institutions in the same sense? I think it's a very good question. Yes, please.
Yes. Ragesh works on Foucault, so I think my answer to that is I need to think more about it, but tentatively, the answer is if you leave it as they are today, they can become part of disciplinary procedure of asylum and clinic. But there is a possibility where you can add this deliberativeness about these things so that you can take them out of that group of unintended consequences of disciplinary kind of a thing. See, Rajesh, I make a distinction between disciplining out of intentionality and disciplining out of consequence. Unintended, disciplines are different from intended disciplines. I wanted to claim that this is not clear in Foucault, that both clinic, asylum, and now to add this with a lot of provisions, old age home can become, or as they exist, unintended disciplines. But it is possible to salvage the last one, that is old age home, from this kind of discipline and then make it as a deliberative discipline.
We have two questions from Dr. K.M. Narayan Rao. And the first one is, can we give a moral basis to the very idea of old age home? And the second one is...
Dr. Ashok Parai, there is one gentleman raising his hand, Ranjit Go. I think...
okay. Please go ahead, sir. Please go ahead. I will come back to Dr. K.M. Narayan's question in a minute. Please go ahead, sir.
Please unmute the...
Unmute and ask. Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Raju. You have given a new orientation to Rousseau's thinking. And I have some doubt regarding your classification of this childhood, old age, and adulthood. Now, let us presume that you have accepted old age home as a chance creation, like the society itself in the model of individualism. Okay, if that be the fact, and if we bring such classification on the basis of rationality, then we just cannot say during modern times, we just cannot say that children, they are only guided by appetite, and the adulthood is just the manifestation of the rationality, and the old age, unless we classify old age, old people from amongst the old people, the infirm people who are both infirm in body and mind, we can say that they also exhibit the rationality as the adults, because there is no age categorization that the childhood stops and the adulthood begins, and the adulthood stops and the old age begins. And these days people used to say that if you think in a newer way, newer possibility, newer dimension, then you are not old. Then how would you think in that line that only adulthood is the exhibition of rationality in per se? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh, for asking that question. In fact, you are disagreeing with Descartes, not with me. Because you remember, I read that thing. It is Descartes, I quote. He says, I reflected that we were children before being men and had to govern for some time by our appetite and our teachers. So you are quite right. This can be contested, but this is not something that I agree. I only quoted Descartes, and I thank you for joining me in disagreeing with this very false demarcation.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any other questions, sir? Okay, so let's go back to Dr. K.M. Narayan's two questions. The first one is, can we give a moral basis to the idea of old age home? The second one is, do you take the idea of old age home as a practical necessity?
Yes, the moral basis for old age home has two moral bases. One is exactly like the clinic and the asylum, that if somebody was sick, then who can treat that person better? A professional doctor or a child, the family member. Okay. Now, some people in the West, the answer is it has to be given to the professional doctor. And here, the foundations for this actually are there in what Professor Nagaraju referred right in the beginning, in Rousseau's Emily. In Emily, while he talks about the glorification of nature and things like that, he says that a child has to be sent to a convent, not and taken away from the mother. Taken away from the mother, because mother's affection, says Rousseau, however valuable it is an obstacle for the growth of the child. So he argues that it is the nurse or the manna, M-A-N-N-A, manna is the word that he uses, who is more professionally competent to nurture and educate the child. Now this comes out beautifully in this film Citizen Kane, Citizen Kane. I don't want to get into that. So these are the two important reasons in favor of old age home. But then what is important is the absence of the emotional bond between the parent and the teacher, not from the point of view of the parent. I don't want to get into that sympathy, charity for parents and benevolence. No, I'm not like it is for your own sake. I am rooting the need for taking care of the parents, not in the need of the parent, but in your own selfish need. But I ask this question, will you be better equipped to face your own old age home when you watch the old people at home, or you will not? So I'm just making that change. So we need to really, consider this. I'm not saying by this, old age means only your own parents. No, for some reason, I'm in Tirupati, my parents are in Delhi. But then there are a lot of parents, in Tirupati. So I'm not talking about, a parent. I'm talking about old age. Old age could be anything. Anybody could be, anybody who is old is, old.
We have another question from Dr. Himanshu Shekhar Samal. That is, does human predicament make so-called institution of old age home?
Yes, human predicament does, but it doesn't not only happen for the other who is old, but for me who will be old. So now my job is to calibrate, to negotiate between the existing present and my imminent future.
We have a well question from a student, Urmila Sahu. She is doing graduation. Her question is, do parents take care of their children because they want the same thing from their children? If so, can it be called as selfless or pure love and affection?
If they do, that's fine. If they don't, I'm saying this is where you're missing out. No, if they do, fine. If there are children who want to take their this thing is fine. But suppose if they don't, then I'm saying this is where you are missing out.
So yes, I think we do not have any such question, and yes, sir, we can wind up now. There is no problem. And I thank you once again all, and I am really sorry that if I have missed out any question. And it is, so we are living in the age of technology, and I think it is the technology mistake. So yes, I hand it over to Professor Mohini Mohammed, Head School of Philosophy.
Thank you, Ashok, for conducting the question and answer session so nicely. Now, I would like to request our colleague, Mrs. Subhankari Pati, to just extend a vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to all of you. Our Honorable VC Sir, Professor N. Nagaraju Sir, esteemed Speaker of the webinar, Professor A. Raghuramaraju Sir, faculties of the GM University, distinguished participants, and dear students. It is indeed a great pleasure on my part to propose vote of thanks for this August gathering. It is my privilege to speak something about the VC Sir, that he is the most true and devoted individual that each scholastic establishment requires. He generally rouses us to mastermind the scholarly conversation to connect with the students. With his able guidance, School of Philosophy will thrive and organize webinar in the near future. We are particularly enchanted to our speaker, Professor Raju, who tosses light on one of the significant subjects of our society, that is advanced age, which need, appropriate consideration and care. Since future society cannot prevail all alone, it can make its column solid with the assistance of help, support, and above all the downside from our senior residents. I hope Professor Raju will make his association with the School of Philosophy in the coming future so that we'll get more opportunity to learn from him. Thank you so much, sir, for your precise and thought-provoking lecture. School of Philosophy is particularly obliged to each and every member to participated in this webinar for the patient hearing and dynamic investment in the conversation. Last yet not the least, our dear student from whom this webinar is organized unquestionably impacted from our speaker and gained so much from him. Thank you, sir.
Sir, may I request our Vice Chancellor, sir, to declare this webinar to be over?
That is a mere formality, but I join all of you in thanking Professor Raghuramaraju for his very lucid presentation and handling so many responses. Thank you, Professor. And we should, I thank Professor Ashok and also Professor Mohammed for reconnecting you back to GM University. All right, let's be in touch. Thanks a lot. Thanks all of you for joining. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Right, wonderful.